Unlike mainland cities such as Backland, Tingen, and Pritz Harbor, colonial islands such as Banzi Harbor lacked gas. The lamps lining the two sides of the street were sparse. They had candles caged in glass, waiting to be lit. Unfortunately, the wind had picked up early, so no one went out in the evening. The candles didn't shine at the predetermined time, and the road was pitch black. The faint outline of the crimson moon shone through the clouds. Compared to before, the wind was much calmer. At the very least, Klein didn't need to be distracted keeping his hat on. Thin fog gradually pervaded the air, and the doors and windows of the mainly two-story houses were shut tight. It was pitch black and devoid of any light, as though no one had lived in the area for a long time. With a yellow lantern in one hand and a hard wooden cane in the other, Klein walked quickly down the quiet street in the direction of the Green Lemon restaurant, which Blazing Danitz had pointed out. Whoosh! Midst the fog, the wind began to swirl as Klein felt a baffling chill down his neck. He lifted his right hand, which held the cane, and propped up the collar of his double-breasted frock coat, completely covering his neck. It was at this moment that a scene suddenly appeared in his mind. In the scene, a black shadow the size of a watermelon appeared from the fog and lunged for his ear. Without thinking, Klein swung his arm and forearm and struck out with his cane. Bam! Just as the black shadow came close, it was struck head-on and sent flying a long distance away. With the help of the lantern's light, Klein finally recognized the thing that had attacked him. It was a head. It was a head that had lost its body, a head that had its esophagus hanging down. The head floated in midair, its face resembling dried cheese with mildew all over. There was a yellowish-green liquid flowing down its skin as it outlined the face's contour. There were only two black holes left where its nose was supposed to be. Its bulging eyes were mostly white without much black. Its lips were mostly rotten, revealing sharpened teeth mixed with blood. Dog's tea. Blazing Danitz silently cursed when he saw this scene, his heart trembling. Even though he had embarked on many treasure hunts and had fought many monsters, such a disgusting and horrifying thing was still rare. At some point in time, a classic revolver had appeared in his hand, and he was about to fire it with his elbow held down. At this moment, he saw a pure ray of light descend from the sky, landing on the somewhat stiff head. A blood-curdling screech rang out, and the shriveled and hideous head was quickly vaporized before dissolving into ashes. It didn't leave a single trace behind. How weak, Danitz subconsciously commented. Is this monster J.M. Sparrow from the Sun Pathway? Doesn't look like it. He likely relied on what should be some sort of mystical item. I didn't even realize it just now, but J.M. Sparrow had already discovered the enemy and attacked. He really is very strong. Danitz quickly turned his attention to something else. Just as his thoughts were settling down, he saw a similar head fly out from the fog to his side from the corner of his eye. It was trying to bite his neck. Bang! Danitz calmly pulled the trigger. The brass bullet accurately hit the head covered in mold, shattering the head's glabella as it fell backwards and stopped in midair. Soon after, a crimson ball quickly expanded above Danitz's empty left palm, and a fiery light began to swirl. He leaned forward and dragged his arm before throwing the fireball, causing it to crash into the stiff head. Flames soared up as the head burned red. The skin on the head quickly charred, emitting a sizzling sound. However, it lunged forward with its mouth wide open, ready to bite Danitz's neck as though it wasn't effective. This turn of events was somewhat out of Danitz's expectation. He nearly failed to dodge in time, and he hurriedly rolled forward, barely dodging fatal damage. A bright scarlet color appeared on his left palm once again, but the flame didn't expand this time. Instead, it shrunk, layer by layer. Within a second, Danitz threw out the orange fireball, which was only the size of an eye, while dodging. The fireball was controlled by his spirituality. It drew an arc in the air, and accurately flew into the mouth of the shriveled head. Boom! The fiery light flashed, and the explosion splintered the flying head from the inside out. Countless pieces of it, along with its blood, splashed everywhere. I've finally finished it. Danitz rolled to his feet and breathed a sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that this monster, which only had a head, wasn't easy to deal with. Yet J.M. Sparrow had killed one with ease. It's mainly because the Beyonder powers in the Sun domain restrain such things, Danitz added scornfully in his heart. As he thought of this, he turned his head to the side and realized that J.M. Sparrow hadn't waited for him. With his cane and lantern, he was jogging into the distance, his black coat fluttering behind him slightly. Dog's tea. Wait for me, wait for me. Danitz's pupils contracted as he widened his pace to chase after the man. He didn't dare to stay on his own in the thin fog and dim surroundings. Inside the Green Lemon restaurant, Donna looked at the white porcelain bowl in front of her and the dark red blood cakes in it. She thought of the strange horror she felt when seeing the customers eating just now, as well as the blood oozing out of the headless cloaked man's neck. Her throat moved and she almost vomited. Donna decided to give up the delicacy, even though the fragrance had already seeped into her nose. She ate some salad and mashed potatoes without much thought and waited for the wind outside to die down. She felt the clock on the wall moving ever so slowly. Time passed by the second. The customers at the table paid their bills and left the second floor. The second floor became quieter and quieter as it turned emptier and emptier. Thud, thud, thud. Donna felt that the sound of feet on the wooden steps as they descended were frustrating. Finally, she noticed that the trees outside were no longer swaying, and the ground was littered with all sorts of junk. The wind has stopped, Donna said, pointing excitedly to the window. Her father, an import and export merchant, Erty Branch, pinched his forehead and growled, "Where's your table manners, Donna?" But, just as Donna was about to argue, Cleves raised his palm and pressed it down. "TT 7:40 p.m. and we're almost done with dinner. Let's head back as soon as possible. There are many nasty legends about the night in Banzi Harbor." Every merchant who depended on the sea for a living was more or less superstitious, especially when it came to the legends of the native. Therefore, Erty fell silent and agreed with Cleves' suggestion. He quickly foot the bill and led his family and bodyguards down to the first floor. Cleves was about to open the door to find his way when a creaking sound came from a nearby room. Donna almost screamed out in fright and gripped Denton's hand tightly. A figure walked out, glanced at them, and calmly said, "It's fogged up. It's best not to go out." The figure wore a black tailcoat without a hat. There was a pair of glasses on the bridge of his nose. His face was fleshy and almost circular. "What are you trying to convey, Mr. Fox?" Cleves recognized him to be the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant. Fox said without much of an expression, "In Banzi, during the nights when the fog and weather drastically changes, it's best not to go out or respond to any knocking. Otherwise, one might encounter bad things." The more Donna listened, the more scared she became. She loudly emphasized, "People have already left ahead of us." Fox pointed to the rooms on the first floor. They chose to stay. Creak. Thud. As soon as Fox's voice fell, the doors to the various rooms opened either softly or heavily. The gentlemen and ladies from before came to the doors and quietly watched Donna and her family, who were considering to leave. "Perhaps we should respect the customs here," Erty Branch said in deliberation. "Staying a night here won't affect our boarding of the ship." According to the experience Cleves was equipped with, he should have followed Fox's advice and stayed at the Green Lemon restaurant, but he remembered Jam and Sparrow's reminder. It was a reminder of a powerful adventurer who was watching blazing Danitz. There is danger dormant in Banzi Harbor. It doesn't refer to it being indoors or outdoors. Cleves quickly made his decision and said to Erty, "Mr. Branch, please trust in my profession." "Yeah, I've seen a lot of folklore, but none of them are pragmatic," another bodyguard agreed. Before he finished his sentence, knocking sounds came from the restaurant's door, and a series of screams could be heard from afar. "Look, there are knocking sounds." "Don't respond," Fox said slowly. Erty's heart palpitated as he was about to choose to stay the night. Donna looked at the gentlemen and ladies standing at their doorways, and she felt that their gazes looked abnormally weird. "No, we have to return," the young lady stressed, almost screaming. Cleves could also feel the indescribable pressure and the coldness that seeped through his bones, and he once again stressed his opinion. "If there are any problems, then it'll be more dangerous staying here. There are cannons on the ship, as well as sailors with guns and sabers." This reason convinced Erty, who motioned for Cleves to open the door. Cleves waited for the knocking to subside. Then, with one hand holding a gun, he pulled open the door with the other. The wind's howling had quietened, and the darkness was deep amidst the spreading fog. It was as if there were many monsters hidden within. Donna held her younger brother, Denton, and hiding behind Cecile, left the restaurant one step at a time. Creak. The door to the restaurant suddenly closed, preventing them from returning. At this moment, they were like ships stranded in a storm, as though they were the only ones left in this world. With the lantern in hand, Cleves walked in front when he suddenly saw something fly over and crash into the ground, rolling a few times. Donna and the others subconsciously looked over and immediately let out cries of terror. It was a shriveled, rotting head. Then they saw light. Light fell from the sky, and the disgusting head melted into nothingness. This, Erdie and the others swallowed hard, their bodies trembling. At that moment, they saw a faint yellow light approaching from the depths of the fog. It was a figure holding a lantern, wearing a half-top hat and a double-breasted frock coat which shared the same color as the night. The lines of his face were distinct, and there was an obvious sharpness in the coldness. "Uncle Sparrow!" Donna and Denton cried out. They felt their hearts settle down. Klein tossed the lantern to Danitz beside him, and he walked over with his cane in hand before calmly saying to Cleves and the others as if nothing was out of the ordinary, "Let's go to the telegraph office first." "What about the Timothys?" "Timothys? They're still in the restaurant," Erdie Branch subconsciously replied. He then pointed to the area where the moldy head had been purified and anxiously asked, "What was that just now?" Maintaining J.M. and Sparrow's persona, Klein didn't answer and glanced at Danitz before walking directly past Donna's family to the tightly closed door of the Green Lemon restaurant. Blazing Danitz held his lantern and was relieved, having finally completed a goal. He straightened his back, looked at Erdie and the others and scoffed. "You don't have to worry about what that was. Just know that it's a monster that will harm you." If J.M. and Sparrow wasn't only a few meters away, he even wanted to proclaim, "Only I, Lord Blazing Danitz, can protect you." Cleves exchanged glances with Cecil and Teague before taking the initiative to step forward. He comforted his employers and said, "Leave your questions to after we get back to the White Agate." Frankly speaking, the three bodyguards had all been adventurers for varying periods of time. However, their understanding of monsters was still stuck at the level of folklore or stories of their drunken peers. They still found it rather surreal, as though they were in a dream. However, since they had seen creatures like murlocs before, it wasn't that hard to accept other things. At most, they were a little weirder and uglier than murlocs. When they thought of this, their hearts calmed significantly, and the guns in their hands seemed to regain their strength. However, the pure light that descended from the sky still exceeded their scope of understanding. They only felt that their world view, outlook on life, and values that had long been formed had begun wavering. All they could do was temporarily ignore it, suppressing all their emotions to the bottom of their hearts. Klein stopped at the door of the Green Lemon restaurant, raised his right hand, and tapped it with his fingers. Thump, thump, thump. After he knocked 3 times in a rhythmic fashion, no one answered and there was silence. If not for the candlelight shining through the windows and the cracks in the door, Klein would have thought it was an empty building that had long been abandoned. Thump, thump, thump. He knocked 3 more times. Within the restaurant, the silence continued. Everyone seemed to be abiding by the custom of not responding to any knocking in foggy weather. Klein retracted his right hand and patted the hem of his double-breasted frock coat. Suddenly he leaned back, lifted his knees and kicked his right foot forward. With a bang, the restaurant's door suddenly opened wide, and all the nails that had fixed the copper lock popped out. Wearing a tailcoat, the boss, Fox, with his pudgy, nearly round face, was still standing in his original position. The ladies and gentlemen who had chosen to stay the night all opened the doors one by one and stood quietly at the door, looking over without a word. "What do you want?" Fox didn't flare up, his tone the same as before. However, he had a revolver in his hand. With his spirit vision activated, Klein turned his head and looked around. He didn't find any traces of evil on any of the humans present. His gaze landed on the boss of the restaurant, and his gaze turned heavy. He looked into the owner's eyes and asked, "Where's the Timothy family?" Fox repressed his emotions, as though a storm was brewing in his dark brown eyes while he looked at the man for 2 seconds. Finally, he unnaturally turned his head and said, "There's another table. Foreigners. Upstairs." "Get them to come down," Klein ordered coldly. Fox was silent for a few seconds, until the man quickly drew his gun and aimed it at his head. He took a deep breath and sent a waiter up to the 2nd floor, leading the Timothy family down the stairs. What happened? Timothy was a man who was more than 30 years of age. He was on vacation with his newly wedded wife. Klein lowered his gun and flatly said, "Something unexpected has happened in Banzi Harbor. Are you coming back with me to the ship or staying here?" Something unexpected. While Timothy ruminated over the words, he saw Ertie Branch outside nodding at him solemnly. He knew that the other party was a very rich import and export merchant who had 3 bodyguards with him. He believed that if there were any unexpected circumstances, then it would be safer to stay with them, so the answer was obvious. As for the unique customs of Banzi Harbor, it was just a custom. He held his wife's hand and walked towards the door, politely smiling as he said, "All our things are on the ship. Of course we'll stick with you." "Thank you." He and his new wife expressed their gratitude in unison, walked past Klein, and joined with the Branch family outside. Klein withdrew his revolver, politely bowed at Fox and said, "Excuse us." With that, he turned around and walked towards Cleves and company, who were illuminated by the light leaking out from the restaurant. With a thud, the door of the Green Lemon restaurant closed once again, swaying slightly in the wind. Klein had actually noticed an unusual, subtle atmosphere just now, but since his spirit vision failed to obtain anything, he didn't wish to investigate it too deeply, lest he ignite the huge danger lurking in Banzi Harbor. He returned to Danitz's side and did a headcount with the light of the lantern. Donna's family of 4, their 3 bodyguards, the Timothy couple, and several servants are all present. Klein switched the hands in which he held his revolver and cane with, lifted his gun-wielding right hand, slipped it deep into the double-breasted frock coat, and rubbed the sun brooch. With a flash of dark golden light, an invisible force quickly spread outwards, flooding everyone present like a wave. Instantly, Donna and the others felt as if they had arrived in the south, like they were bathing in warm sunlight that dispersed the cold chill within their body. They were no longer as nervous and worried, as if they had found their courage again. The remnant black colors obtained from the special cured meat from Damir Harbor quickly disappeared, along with the extremely minute amounts of wicked feeling. Sun Halo was able to enhance the courage of one's companions within a 20-meter radius and purify any evil forces within them. With the help of the brooch, and while under the control of Klein's spirituality and psyche, he could use the power of the sun to bypass any targets he didn't wish to help. "Let's head to the telegraph office first." Klein repeated himself as he held his cane in his left hand and his revolver in his right. After getting his bearings, he proceeded forward. Danitz followed his directions and walked diagonally to the side. Cleves, Cecil, and Teague very professionally took charge of security for the other 2 flanks. With a party of more than 15 people, it's easy for us to suffer losses once we're attacked. Moreover, only Blazing can truly be considered a helper. What should I do? Thinking back to the monsters he had encountered, Klein suddenly slipped the revolver back into his underarm holster and handed the cane to his right palm. He reached into his pocket with his left hand and removed the wall of spirituality around an iron cigar case. He took out Azek's copper whistle and held it in his hand, occasionally tossing it up. He believed that such an action would divert the attention of the undead monsters, which only had one head left from the others, leaving the brass, ancient whistle as the only thing in their eye. This way, I don't have to worry about not being able to rescue them in time. That's the effect of an MT. Klein sighed and quickened his pace. At this moment, 3 shriveled heads covered in mold flew out from the thin fog in front of him. They charged towards Klein from different directions like arrows, completely ignoring the existence of the other delicious meat. 3. Danitz's pupils contracted, a little worried that Jamin Sparrow would end up flustered, but he also looked forward to seeing his true strength. 3. Klein calmly shook his left hand and threw Azek's whistle into the air. The heads with esophaguses hanging down from them immediately drew an arc and headed for their primary target. Klein took a step back and, without any expression, raised his hand and squeezed the sun brooch. All of a sudden, dense golden flames were produced where the copper whistle was, as a holy aura was emanating. Fire of light. The 3 skinny heads let out miserable shrieks at the same time, turning into dust under the golden light. Klein took 2 steps forward and reached out to catch Azek's copper whistle. That can actually work. Another mystical item. Danitz froze for 2 seconds, flabbergasted at how easily the assault had been resolved. At that moment, Timothy and his wife also clearly saw what the things which were attacking them looked like. One of them turned pale from fright while the other asked, flustered, what was that?" Donna immediately turned around and nodded seriously. "Leave your questions to after we get back to the White Agate." With that said, she put her finger to her lips, mimicking Uncle Sparrow's meaning of silence. Remembering the holy aura displayed by the young man in front of him, Timothy swallowed hard and pulled at his wife's hand. He fell silent while remaining alert, and his servants had no choice but to obey upon seeing this. The group continued on through the moonlit streets. The lights of the houses on either side of the streets were extinguished, leaving only darkness behind the oriel window. Donna felt as if pairs of eyes were following her and the others, but for some reason no one showed up. They must all be afraid of Uncle Sparrow. She held her brother's hand tight and walked amidst the protective circle of her parents. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the side of the street. He wore a black cloak and leaned forward, revealing a neck that was still bleeding. There was nothing above the neck, with the interior of the cloak reflecting the moonlight. Gasp! The headless figure let out a beast-like growl that sounded like gasping as it rushed towards Klein, stomping on the street to the point that the ground slightly shook. The spot it passed by just happened to be in Danitz's path. This infamous pirate cursed and flung an orange-yellow fireball, which had been repeatedly compressed from his hand. Boom! The fireball exploded, causing the headless man to retreat several steps. His clothes were tattered, and his skin quickly charred while his cloak was set on fire. However, to the monsters that had already lost their lives, this wasn't a serious injury. And in that instant, with a crisp crack, the scarlet flame on the black cloak suddenly soared into the air, as if it were blooming. Klein, in his coat, jumped out of the flames, borrowing the momentum from his fall and his own strength in order to stab the cane he held in both hands directly into the headless man's neck. Splat! The cane sank into the headless man's body and emerged from his crotch. Bam! Klein's back muscles bulged, forcefully throwing the headless monster to the ground. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he stood behind the monster and continued to grip the cane tightly while he poured his spirituality into the sun brooch. He had already used his spirit vision to determine that holy light summoning, cleave of purification, and fire of light were all unable to deal with this blackish-green monster in a short amount of time, so he could only use another method. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. The headless man struggled with all his might, but like a snake, he fell to his knees and was firmly nailed to the ground by the cane. 2 seconds, 1 second. Klein opened his mouth and spat out a word in ancient Hermes. Sun. Specks of radiance appeared and turned into water droplets that sprinkled over the headless man's body. Sizzle. When the blackish-green gas was emitted, Klein let go of his cane and took 2 steps to the side. Within the sparse rain, the headless man continuously twitched before finally calming down, eventually melting into a pool of blood. No Beyonder characteristics, this means it's not the real enemy. At most, it can be considered as a created servant. Klein withdrew his cane, turned, and walked back to the group. So cool. Denton let out a belated cheer. Donna's eyes sparkled. He was still borrowing the powers of a mystical item. However, his phasing away during the flames has indicated his true strength. He really isn't easy to deal with. Blazing, Danitz retracted his gaze, feeling that his decision not to mindlessly run off had been extremely wise. 7 or 8 minutes later, the group that cleared out 2 more waves of monsters arrived at the Banzi Port's telegraph office. Cleves took the initiative and knocked on the door. Who is it? A gentle female voice came from inside. We're looking for the captain of the White Agate, Mr. Elland, Cleves answered through the door. In the quiet night, the woman's voice spoke at a moderate pace. He and his first mate went next door to the cathedral. The person speaking sounds odd, or is she like that only on similar nights? Klein flicked a gold coin and confirmed that she wasn't lying. As they were preparing to leave, the female voice in the telegraph office hesitated and said, Can you guys help me take note of someone? He's my colleague. He went out before the wind started tonight and never came back. His name is Pavelcourt. Bishop Pavelcourt. Cleves didn't directly answer the woman behind the telegraph office's door. He turned to glance at J.M. and Sparrow, waiting for his decision. In the eyes of this former adventurer, it was a difficult task for 15 people to get back to the White Agate safely. They couldn't and shouldn't be distracted by helping her search for someone. However, he was well aware that the current pillar of support was J.M. and Sparrow and Blazing Danitz. They were the only ones who had the right to decide on the matter. Klein remained silent for 2 seconds, then he spoke in a measured voice. What does he look like? He believed that having more information would help him escape this strange, foggy city, so he casually asked in passing. As for whether he would help take note of the person's whereabouts, it all depended on what happened next. While inquiring, Klein also warned himself not to pursue the matter too deeply or else it might risk triggering the danger dormant in Banzi Harbor. Between understanding the situation and avoiding the risks, he had to engage in a balancing act, no more, no less, without leaning too far left or right. This might be an easy or difficult feat, because no one knew what would happen once he took the step. He could only judge based on his experience and intuition, and he could fall into a pit at any time. This left Klein highly stressed, as his mind whirled at an unprecedented speed. In the dense darkness and thin fog, the telegraph office's door remained tightly shut. The woman inside paused and said, "He's a very handsome man. He has 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and a mouth." Why does this answer sound so scary? Is there something wrong with this woman? According to the customs of Banzi Harbor, she shouldn't have even responded. Blazing Danitz had the urge to kick open the door, rush into the telegraph office, and check the situation inside. It was at this moment that he saw Jamin Sparrow put his hand on his hat and turn to the side. Storm Cathedral, Klein briefly stated their destination. He didn't bother with whether there was anything wrong with the woman at the telegraph office. It was just like how he didn't delve into the secrets of the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant or the customers who had chosen to stay the night. The wind was getting lighter and the fog was thinning. The candlelight from the cathedral was shining through the narrow windows high above, like a beacon in a storm. After Klein used sun halo again, Donna and the others regained some of their courage, like people who had fallen into the water and desperately grabbed onto the last straw. They hurriedly walked on the empty streets in silence. Soon they arrived outside the Storm Cathedral, but the doors were shut tight. Glancing at the Storm's sacred emblem on the door, Klein raised his hand and knocked 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. A vigilant male voice immediately came from behind the door. "Who is it?" "Jamin Sparrow," Klein replied straight away. He could already tell that it was Captain Ellen. "Why are you here?" Ellen asked again, without opening the door. Klein raised his cane and calmly said, "You helped me pay White Shark's compensation." After a moment of surprise and amusement, Ellen made an initial confirmation that it was the real Jamin Sparrow outside. At the very least, even a monster adept at disguising wouldn't have known something that was privy only to the 2 of them. He still felt hesitant until Cleves, Ertie Branch, Donna, and company sounded out in succession. Only then did he relax and allow his first mate, Harris, to unlock and open the door. A heavy clunking sound rang out, and Klein saw Ellen in his boat-shaped hat, sword in one hand and musket in the other. Something happened here too, he keenly asked, based on his conclusion from the situations from before. Ellen stepped aside to let Donna and the others in. And he pointed at the prayer hall and said, "The priest I knew, Jace, died in there. He was decapitated, and Bishop Millet is nowhere to be found. Same for the other priests. Also, the servants in the church are all gone. A dead priest with a missing bishop. The whole cathedral is devoid of the living." This is a little problematic. Klein gripped the cold Azek's copper whistle, his heart sinking. Of course, he was very clear that the priest and the bishop weren't the main force of the Church of Storm that managed Beyonder matters in Banzi Harbor. Underneath this cathedral, there was definitely a mandated Punisher team formed out of 6-8 Beyonders, as well as an indefinite number of sealed artifacts. Even high-sequence Beyonders wouldn't be able to wipe out this force in a short span of time without causing a stir. As long as they're alive and able to use sealed artifacts, the problem shouldn't be too terrible. So, at this point in time, what is the mandated Punisher team doing? Based on his previous experience as a Nighthawk, Klein made a guess of the standard operating procedure. In the process, he followed Ellen to the prayer hall and examined the body of the deceased priest. Jace died a tragic death, as if his head had been decapitated while he was still alive. Unlike the monsters outside, his esophagus and head were separated. With Klein's spirit vision, this priest no longer had any remnant spirit. It would be very difficult to have a successful spirit channeling ritual. Is it due to a unique killing technique, or has it been dealt with accordingly? It's different from the monsters outside. Was it because the operation happened in a rush? Combining all that he knew, Klein concluded his previous speculation. He felt that there were 2 possibilities. One, there was something of local origins, perhaps a living sealed artifact or a mid-sequence Beyonder who had lost control underground. It escaped the cathedral and killed Jace while fleeing, causing the abnormal changes in Banzi Harbor. The bishop, priests, and mandated punishers were in desperate pursuit, attempting to form a seal again or get rid of the perpetrator. The servants had been led underground, and were under the protection of the remaining mandated Punisher. But this didn't explain the strange behavior of the residents of Banzi Harbor. The second possibility was that the primitive sacrifice ritual to the god of weather had been resurrected in a number of people in Banzi Harbor, and that the flying heads and headless monsters were in adherence with the descriptions of flesh and blood consumption in the sacrificial rituals and the burying of heads in the altar. And due to some unknown reason, this group of people had raided the cathedral and killed Reverend Jess. The rest of the population had more or less understood the situation, but they had opted for silence. They might have already assaulted the area underground and are currently engaged in an intense battle with the mandated Punishers, priests, and the bishop, who are aided by sealed artifacts. They might have transformed all the servants into monsters or thrown them out. It can also be that they're under pursuit from the Beyonders of the Church of Storms, and the servants have been sent underground to receive protection to prevent any accidents. From the fact that Jace's corpse hasn't been used, there's a possibility that it's the latter development. If I were to head underground to confirm the situation, I'll definitely be attacked since we're unfamiliar Beyonders. Besides, the remnant strength might not be sufficient. Klein looked at the priest on the ground and realized that his Beyonder characteristic had condensed into a blue sapphire by his neck. He retracted his gaze and didn't pick up the item. He didn't want to attract the violent retaliation from the short-tempered Church of Storms, so he turned to Elland and Harris. "Let's return to the ship first." He casually tossed the gold coin and confirmed that there was no battle currently going on underground. In any case, regardless of whether there were any mandated Punishers present, the cathedral grounds were no longer suitable for prolonged stay. After all, Klein wasn't sure if his guess was right, and he could only make the safest choice. All right. Elland had no desire to stay here either, being in a situation where he waited nervously for any changes to befall him. As long as he returned to the White Agate, he would have many cannons and many sailors that could withstand accidents to a certain extent. After a short rest, the group left the cathedral. With the addition of Elland and Harris, the team's defense clearly became much tighter. Klein no longer needed to toss the copper whistle to attract the monsters, so he stuffed it back into his pocket. "Shall we send a telegram to the Church of Storms' headquarters to report on Banzi Harbor?" After a few steps, Elland made a cautious suggestion. This way, even if there were major unforeseen events, as long as they held on, they would eventually be saved. Klein didn't object. Walking through the thin fog ahead of him, he calmly said, "We'll pass by the telegraph office." Phew! Blazing Danitz breathed a sigh of relief, then his heart skipped a beat. He was afraid that the Church of Storms would perform investigations and discover that an infamous pirate had played an important role in this matter, and by then, he would probably still be trapped on the White Agate. Although I save people, the mandated Punishers aren't friendly to those who don't belong to them, especially when I'm a pirate. Stumped for a moment, Danitz decided to get over the immediate danger before considering other matters. After walking for a while, they saw the telegraph office in sight. A faint yellow light suddenly emerged from the side street and approached them from the depths of the fog. It was a middle-aged man carrying a lantern. It was a middle-aged man carrying a hurricane lamp. He wore a dark blue bishop robe, embroidered with the symbol of the storm. His head was bowed and his face was pale. He was wheezing as he staggered while walking. Elland focused and blurted out, "Bishop Millet." The middle-aged man looked up, raised his hurricane lamp and said, "Elland, is it?" At this moment Klein took a step back, letting Elland stand out. He didn't wish for the bishop of the Church of Storms to pay notice to him. Danitz even shrunk his neck back, using Erdy's plump body to block himself. "Yes, Your Excellency. Jace is dead." "What happened?" Elland wasn't a novice, so he didn't directly step forward. Bishop Millet coughed and said, "An old custom has been revived, and a group of heathens with dirty blood running through their veins are beginning to offer live sacrifices and are consuming their flesh and blood. Jace noticed that they were problematic and ended up being killed by them. The matter can no longer be covered up. They used the sacrificial ritual to change the weather and tried to attack the cathedral. They were defeated by the mandated Punisher and fled to the mountain. They escaped to the cave where the altar is. I was injured in combat. Without being able to hold out much longer, all I could do was slowly make my way back." Just as he finished speaking, a bright ball of light burst out of the distant fog, as if countless bolts of lightning were striking down. With the help of this light, Klein and the others could see the fog-covered mountain range by the shore, as well as the peak which was connected to Thunderstorm. To a certain extent, this confirmed Bishop Millet's claim. Ellen was about to step forward to support the Storm Bishop when he saw Jam and Sparrow take out a gold coin and mutter in a low voice, "He has ill intention." Ding! The gold coin flew up and then tumbled in the air before landing in Klein's palm, heads facing up. It meant a positive result. Bishop Millet stared straight at the scene, his light brown eyes suddenly flashing with a dark red light. Whoosh! A strong gale blew out from Bishop Millet's body, lifting up his dark blue bishop robes. Crack! 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 The branches of the nearby trees snapped as they flew into the air. Donna's body involuntarily rose a few meters into the air before being thrown out several meters. Her body ached all over when she fell to the ground. It wasn't just her. Cecile, Denton, Timothy, Harris, and the others were all blown up by the wind and landed in different spots. Only Cleves, Teague, and Erdy, either because of their training or abnormally heavy weight, staggered to the ground and tumbled a few times. Ellen, who was facing Bishop Millet directly, did a series of retreating and backward somersaulting actions, dodging the incoming blow from the wind. Klein and Danitz didn't attempt to resist it head-on. Instead, they flew backward like kites. Although they looked like they were about to collapse to the ground, they ultimately managed to keep their balance. As soon as the hurricane stopped, 6 figures emerged from the dispersing fog. They were all wearing black cloaks and were headless. Left with only bleeding necks, their hoods were supported up by the eddies of the hurricane. Gasp! Gasp! Their throats emitted the low grunts of a beast like the moment before they were ready to attack. Sue! 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 A series of thin and sharp wind blades shot out, leaving a clear and deep rift where Klein was somersaulting. Taboo! 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 From both sides of the lantern wielding Bishop Millet, whose dark blue bishop robe had flared up slightly, 6 headless men rushed at Klein, Ellen, and the others, stomping on the ground until it trembled. One headless monster is already hard enough to deal with, but now there are 6 of them, and there's even a bishop who's obviously corrupt. When Blazing Danitz saw this scene, he couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. At this moment, a bronze beam streaked past his eyes and shot into the distance. Dang! 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 Azek's copper whistle dropped to the ground and bounced a few times. With a whoosh, the 6 headless men changed direction at the same time, rushing towards the location where Azek's copper whistle came to a stop, leaving Bishop Millet standing alone in his original spot. Klein seized the opportunity, lifted his left hand, tearing off the sun brooch inside his coat, and threw it to Captain Ellen, who was closest to him. He shouted succinctly, "Inject your spirituality." 5 seconds. Holy water. After saying this, he ignored his silk top hat that had been blown away, and instead he bent his body, dashing towards Bishop Millet in a zigzag manner. Sue! 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 One after another, wind blades were shot out in close succession, all of them aimed at Klein. In a flash, the ground showed signs of being cut and slashed. Klein either somersaulted, lunging forward, or jumping up by supporting his body with his hands to avoid the first round of concentrated fire. The dark red light in Bishop Millet's eyes grew brighter as he raised his hand. Sue! 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 At this moment, the wind blades inundated him like a machine gun. Klein only had enough time to dodge half of it before his body was torn apart, turning into thin and light shreds of paper that flew into the air. Klein appeared in another direction and continued to charge at Bishop Millet, trying to close the distance between them to an effective distance. After catching the sun brooch, Ellen immediately felt the heat. He wished that he could take off his clothes and jump into freezing water. He thought for a moment about the words Jam and Sparrow had left him before taking out a tin-colored alcohol flask from the inside of his clothes, unscrewed the lid, and poured out all of the lanti-proof inside. The strong aroma of the wine rapidly spread in all directions. Blazing Danitz looked around, feeling certain of the situation. With a grimace, he genuflected and suddenly pressed both his palms onto the ground. 2 scarlet fire serpents appeared out of thin air, clinging to the ground as they spread towards Azek's copper whistle and created 4 burning walls of fire. His original plan had been to throw a fireball at Bishop Millet and let Jam and Sparrow use the flames to easily jump towards the bishop and launch an attack. However, after seeing that the area around the bishop was filled with freezing gales, he rationally gave up on the idea. He was prepared to first clean up the headless monsters, to prevent them from disturbing Jam and Sparrow's ability to use his true strength. Cleves, Cecil, Teague, and Harris had already stood up again and had drawn their guns. They surrounded Erdy, Donna, and Timothy in the middle, guarding them against any other monsters that might appear. Their experience taught them that, without any prior teamwork training, it was best not to interfere in a battle that was beyond that of ordinary humans. Taboo, taboo, taboo. The 6 headless men, oblivious to the burning flames, burst through the scarlet walls of fire and began to pounce onto Azek's copper whistle like ravenous dogs. This gave Ellen time to inject his spirituality into the sun brooch with composure. After the holy water condensed, he dripped them into the alcohol flask. Seeing the headless people in a frenzied bunch, Danitz's heart skipped a beat. He bent down halfway, and with a flushed face, condensed a scorching white flaming spear in his right palm. Taking a step forward, he twisted his waist and swung his arm, throwing out the flaming spear. It whistled as it hit a headless man and nailed it to the ground. A blazing white light soared, and the headless man's body was reduced to ashes. The remaining half of his body was also burning, continuously releasing blackish-green gases. Seeing that his attack had succeeded, Danitz was about to continue this attack method when he suddenly sensed a particular kind of crazy, terrifying hunger. At this moment, he felt as though he had arrived in front of a deep abyss, just one step short from falling in. He knew that Jam and Sparrow was no longer suppressing the crazy soul inside him. After using paper figurine substitutes 3 times, Klein finally entered a predetermined distance. The glove on his left palm suddenly exploded with a hunger that had been suppressed for a long time, and dark golden scales began sprouting from it as it squirmed. Klein's pupils faded away, as if they had turned vertical. Immediately after, his pupils reflected Bishop Millet's fluttering dark blue robes. Without a sound, the middle-aged man who was about to produce a large number of wind blades suddenly tilted his head backwards, and his body froze for a second. His eyes, which were glowing with a dark red light, lost their rationality as they were filled with a sense of madness. His skin became smooth and colorful, like the skin of some aquatic creature. He let out a panting sound, as though it had come from the depths of the ocean, as slippery, disgusting tentacles suddenly drilled out from under his dark blue robe. Psychiatrist's frenzy. Klein originally only wanted to use this to interrupt the enemy's attack in order to create an opportunity for him later, but after going berserk, Bishop Millet immediately lost control. The moment the fallen or corrupted man lost his final shackles of reasoning, he immediately stepped into the abyss of losing control. Klein's pupils shrank as he saw the situation. He no longer hesitated, and he switched the soul he was driving. In the midst of his frenzy, the glove on his left palm became stained with a gold color. His expression became dignified as his gaze once again locked onto Bishop Millet. In an instant, his eyes lit up like 2 bolts of lightning. All of a sudden, Bishop Millet let out a blood-curdling screech. His palms and tentacles retracted as he covered his head. His psyche had been penetrated, causing him indescribable pain. Interrogator. Klein pushed himself up with his right hand, and his left hand lit up with a resplendent brilliance. Right on the heels of that, he leaned back and opened his arms as if to embrace the sun. A thick, pure, and blazing brilliance descended from the sky, landing on Bishop Millet and enveloping him within it. The surroundings changed as though it was daytime. The strong gales came to an abrupt halt. Sequence 5, Priest of Light. Bishop Millet's body began to evaporate, first his skin, then his tentacles, and finally his flesh. By the time the brilliant pillar of light disappeared, he no longer looked human. Instead, he had turned into a monster made of bones and flesh. Whatever was left of his aura was rather weak. However, he wasn't dead. The vitality of a rampager was stronger than ever before. Klein's expression didn't change. He took a few steps forward and rushed to the battered body of Bishop Millet. He genuflected, leaned forward, and pressed his left palm against the flesh. He stopped using the power of the Priest of Light because he wanted to leave some food for creeping hunger. A small crack silently appeared in the palm region of the glove as 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth grew out from it as it madly devoured any flesh, bones, and spirituality. However, Bishop Millet continued struggling. He steadied his flesh and grew new tentacles, trying to entangle Klein and pull him into his embrace. Klein threw his cane, pulled out his revolver, and fired 5 shots in quick succession at the monster. Bang! 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 Bullets ranging from pale gold, brass, and silver colors struck Bishop Millet, igniting patches of different colored flame. Bishop Millet let out a blood-curdling screech once more, one that came from his soul. He finally wasn't able to resist creeping hunger. Even his flesh and soul were transformed into a torrent that poured into the insatiable mouth. In just 2 or 3 seconds, all that was left on the ground were clothes, money, and specks of dark blue and green light blobs. This was the difference between devouring and grazing. Klein wanted the latter more, but there was no other food around. Meanwhile, Captain Elland had already created 2 rounds of holy water inside his alcohol flask. Danitz hurriedly shouted at him, "Throw it over." Without hesitation, Elland threw the alcohol flask towards the headless men who were still vying for the copper whistle. Ahem. Danitz cleared his throat and stood up straight. He leisurely inserted his left palm into his pocket and pushed forward with his right hand, quickly forming many scarlet fire ravens around him. These half-illusionary fire ravens flapped their wings and flew out, following different trajectories of attack. At the same time, they collided with the alcohol flask, which happened to be right on top of the group of headless people. Rumble! The alcohol flask shattered as holy water splattered everywhere. Sizzle! The remaining headless people were all drenched as they screamed and twitched in pain before falling to the ground. They melted away quickly into blood as Azek's copper whistle lay still in the middle of the purified area. It's resolved, J.M. Sparrow is really strong. Even if he encounters Captain, he'll have the ability to resist her. It's a pity that I didn't get to see what Beyonder powers he had used. Danitz turned his head to look at Klein, who was standing in front of the remains of Bishop Millet, and silently sighed. Then he saw J.M. Sparrow glance at him coldly. Subconsciously, Danitz dejectedly ran out and picked up Azek's copper whistle. Donna rubbed her bruised arm and saw Uncle Sparrow in his long black coat walking back a few steps before stooping to pick up his half-top hat, silently dust it off, and put it back on. Things. After Klein retrieved his hat, Bishop Millet's Beyonder characteristic had already been fully condensed. It was only the size of a thumb and was translucent and light blue in color. However, from time to time, green streaks would appear like a tidal wave that approached a black hue. Opening the revolver cylinder, Klein shook it, dropping the empty shells that were either gold, silver, or brass in color to the ground, creating crisp tinkling sound. Then he calmly took out a speedloader he had prepared earlier and loaded other Beyonder rounds bullet into the gun. After doing all this, he put away the revolver, bent over to pick up Bishop Millet's Beyonder characteristic, and stuffed it into his pocket without paying too much attention to it. Klein picked up his cane and turned back to the group after taking a few steps. He pulled out a paper figurine and flicked it like he was lashing a whip. Puh! The paper figurine was quickly ignited. It flew out of his hand and turned into specks of scarlet light that fell to the ground, extinguishing into dust. How cool! Denton forgot the pain from his fall and stared intently. It's like Uncle Sparrow is setting off fireworks. Donna nodded in agreement with her brother's word. After using paper figurine substitutes to interfere with the information and traces in the area, Klein looked in the direction of the way back and said calmly and concisely, "Leave this area." With that, he turned around and walked away at a leisurely pace. He took the sun brooch and Azek's copper whistle from Elland and Danitz respectively. Erdy and the others didn't make useless comments, nor did they cry out in pain. They followed quietly behind. In the battle just now, they had fully witnessed the uniqueness of Beyonders, especially Danitz's flaming power. It was the most eye-catching and obvious. It left them a deep impression, making them fully realize that this wasn't something ordinary people could intervene in. All they could do was abide by the instructions and follow closely behind. Only by doing so could they guarantee their survival. Compared to Danitz, the battle between Klein and Bishop Millet mainly involved invisible wind blades and the truly intangible psyche domain. Other than the holy light that seemed to descend from the gods and the frightening sight of Bishop Millet's loss of control, the entire battle seemed completely calm, so it didn't deliver a shock to the onlooker. As they passed by the area they had just been in, Cleves, Cecil, and the others suddenly stopped in their tracks. They saw the ground covered with dense cracks everywhere. This, they instantly understood one thing, and that was that J.M. Sparrow's battle with the fallen bishop was many times more harrowing than the other performance. A sense of horror and security arose at the same time, as all of them quickened their pace. 20 or 30 seconds later, Klein stopped on the street outside the telegraph office. He said to Captain Elland in a deadpan manner, "Do you want to send a telegram?" After saying that, he couldn't help but remind him, "Do not force your way in." All right. On this strange night, Elland was just as cautious. He took a few brisk steps to the telegraph office and knocked on the door 3 times. Thump, thump, thump. Amidst a slightly muffled sound, someone from inside asked, "Who is it?" Klein, who was already on guard, suddenly frowned, because the one who spoke was a man. Ellen was also puzzled. "Do you want to send a telegram?" "Who are you?" "I remember the person on duty was a lady before." The man inside replied calmly, "I'm Pavel Court, Melanie's colleague. She's right next to me. She's fine." Just as Pavel Court finished speaking, the female voice from before immediately followed up, "Yes, I'm doing very well. You don't need to take note anymore. Pavel Court is back. Pal, doesn't your folklore say not to answer or open the door? How did Pavel Court get in?" Klein resisted the urge to question her. Ellen took a step back and cleared his throat. "T'd like to send a telegram to the headquarters of the Church of Storm." "TM sorry, but we can't open the door," Pavel Court replied without emotion. Ellen also felt the strangeness of the matter and didn't dare to force it. Instead, he proposed an alternative plan. "Can you send it for me and pass the draft to me through the crack in the door? The content is about the abnormal changes in Banzi Harbor and the death of Bishop Millet and Priest Jace. It shall be signed off with Elland." "All right." Melanie's voice trailed off, as if she'd returned to the telegraph machine. After waiting for a while, he heard tapping sounds, and before long, a copy of the telegram draft was extended out from the gap under the door. Ellen bent down to pick it up, resisting the urge to peek through the cracks. He looked at the telegram draft, and his nose suddenly twitched. He smelled a faint scent of blood on the paper. He tilted his head and looked at J.M. and Sparrow, using his eyes to inform him that there was a problem with the telegraph office. However, he was met with a deep and unperturbed gaze, as well as words that were said in a calm and indifferent tone. "Return to the ship." After throwing this sentence out, Klein turned around immediately and walked towards the end of the street, his figure gradually blending into the thin fog. Carrying a broken lantern, Danitz immediately followed after him. Without any hesitation, Donna and the others did the same. After pondering in silence for 2 seconds, Ellen took the telegram draft and ran after the group. No other sounds came out from the telegraph office anymore. It was unusually quiet. Perhaps due to the extermination of the fallen Bishop Millet, Klein and the others didn't meet any more headless people in black cloaks on their way back. Moldy heads were only seen twice, and they were easily dealt with. After walking for an unknown length of time, they finally saw the dock and the white agate which had candlelight seeping out. This sight made Erdy and the others regain their strength. They transitioned from a brisk walk to a jog, all the way until they reached the bottom of the gangway. Klein stood guard below them with his blood-stained cane until everyone was on board. Then, with a tug, he jumped and arrived on the deck with just a few steps. At that moment, Elland had already begun to gather his first mate, second mate, bosun, gunner commander, and other subordinates. He got them to gather the sailors, adjust the cannons, and prepare to depart at any moment. Although leaving the port at night had non-trivial security risks, it would be the best way to avoid danger if the situation worsened. "Uncle Sparrow." Donna held her brother by the hand and trotted to Klein's side, plagued by a bellyful of questions. Klein nodded, pointed to the cabin, and said, "Go back to your room first. We'll talk about it tomorrow. The danger hasn't been averted." Donna nodded obediently. Together with Denton, she put her index finger to her lips. As H.H. After the Branch family and the Timothy family entered the cabin, Klein walked over to Elland, took out Bishop Millet's Bayonder characteristic, and threw it to him. "If there are still mandated punishers alive, return this to them." The Bayonder characteristic left behind by a bishop who might have been a Sequence 6 would definitely be pursued by the Church of Storms, and everyone on the White Agate would be a target of suspicion. Klein didn't want to be wanted by the #1 power at sea as soon as he set sail. If none of the mandated punishers in Banzi Harbor survived, and if reinforcements from headquarters would take a while to arrive, leaving Klein plenty of time to deal with the matter and leave, then he would surely be reluctant to return it and would find a reason to get it back. Ellen caught the thumb-sized object, glancing at it doubtfully. He didn't ask what it could be used for, and he chuckled. "Don't worry about the Church of Storms' investigation. I'll hint to them that you're with me. So I'll be considered a member of MI9 by the Church of Storm." Klein nodded without saying anything else. Ellen looked at Danitz and probingly asked, blazing, "How's I?" Danitz chuckled dryly and took a leaf out of someone's book. "Guess. T don't think so then," Ellen replied with tacit understanding. With the simple matters dealt with, Klein returned to the side of the ship and looked at the fog-shrouded Banzi harbor, prepared against any hidden dangers. Time ticked by, and the peak of the mountain next to the shore lit up once again with the lights of a thunderstorm. Streaks of silver and violent bolts of lightning swept the area without restraint before they gradually calmed down. The fog in Banzi harbor began to dissipate, and the light of the crimson moon became clearer. "It's over." Even after seeing this, Klein still didn't dare to completely relax. Half an hour later, 3 men who claimed to be mandated punishers came to the dock to see Captain Ellen. After J.M. and Sparrow confirmed it with a divination and a round of questioning, Ellen allowed the sailors to lower the gangway. The 3 mandated punishers motioned for the surrounding crew to leave. Then they lowered their voices and informed the captain of the situation. Klein didn't move closer to listen, but instead he waited patiently for the matter to end. A few minutes later, Ellen returned Bishop Millet's remaining characteristic to the mandated punishers and watched them leave the white agate to deal with the rest of the mess. Ellen exhaled and came to Klein's and Danitz's side. He casually said with a tinge of lingering fear, "The matter has been resolved. There aren't any problems." Has it really been solved? Klein suddenly thought of Court and Melanie behind the telegraph office door. He recalled Fox, the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant, and the many lodgers who had watched them silently. Ellen continued, to be specific, Jace discovered the revival of ancient customs, cannibalism and live sacrifice, confirming that a small number of people in Banzi Harbor had become heretics. He hurried back to the church and reported this to Bishop Millet, but unbeknownst to him, the person before him was the leader of the heretics, a true fallen one. He had his neck cut off by Millet's wind blade and died in the Cathedral of the Lord. Millet was about to dispose of the body, but he was discovered by the servants, hence, things spiraled out of control. Some of the servants were turned into monsters, while some were led by the priests to hide underground. Without any means to hide himself, Millet quickly left the cathedral, gathered the heretics, and headed for the altar at the mountaintop. The weather changed as a result. After the mandated punishers retrieved 3 sealed artifacts, they rushed over and engaged in an intense battle. In the process, Millet was injured and escaped, while the rest of the heretics remained to defend the altar, which was eventually overrun. The church's headquarters has already replied, and they'll be sending people to investigate the cause of Bishop Millet's fall. I told them that we were only able to kill Bishop Millet by joining forces because he was heavily injured. By the way, the mandated punishers have got me to get the Branch and Timothy families to sign a confidential agreement. After giving a general account of the situation, Ellen let out a long sigh of relief and busied himself with the remaining matter. Klein didn't dare to completely relax. He stayed on deck until the clouds appeared to burn when the sun slowly rose, illuminating the entire port. He saw the residents leave their houses one by one, basking in the golden sunlight, chatting and laughing as they headed for their respective jobs. Banzi Harbor finally had the breath of human life again. "It's really over." Klein turned around, slightly puzzled. He had planned to catch up on his sleep, but only after the ship had departed. As for Danitz, although he had long been yawning, he remained motionless when he saw J.M. and Sparrow being motionless. On the way into the cabin, Klein met Ellen, who had also not slept the entire night. "Good morning. We're about to leave the port." "There's nothing to worry about," Ellen greeted with a smile. As he spoke, the white agate's whistle sounded. Upon hearing the sound, Klein secretly exhaled, deciding to put all his doubts behind him. He didn't want to think about Banzi Harbor anymore, so he nodded in response. Ellen stretched his neck and commented with a sigh, "Last night, I had a mystical feeling that the old Binzi and the modern Banzi Harbor overlap." Klein had intended to walk past him when he suddenly grasped a word and asked with a grave expression, "Binzi?" That's the ancient name of Banzi Harbor. 300 or 400 years ago, it was called Binzi Town. Later, due to its pronunciation and other factors, it gradually evolved into Banzi, Ellen introduced in passing. Klein's pupils shrank when he heard the answer. He remembered very clearly that the evil spirit in Backlund's underground relic had once mentioned that if one wanted to find one of the founders of Rose Redemption, the former king of angels, Metasai, and his descendants, one could go to Benzie town to try their luck. Benzie? Klein's heart seemed to freeze over, inch by inch. A chill radiated from the depths of his bone marrow. He jerked his gaze back to the harbor, to the scenes of the telegraph office with its tightly closed doors, and the lodgers in Green Lemon restaurant who were silently staring at him. If I had probed deeper, then there might be a high probability that I would have attracted the Rose Redemption or even a hidden red angel. There were several times where I danced at the edge of a cliff. Luckily, I managed to restrain my impulse and curiosity about the weird situation at Green Lemon restaurant and the telegraph office. Klein retracted his gaze, finding the sun brooch inadequate in keeping his back from oozing with a layer of cold sweat. Compared to the arrival of the true creator, this unknown and undetonated situation was much more horrifying. At least Klein couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if he kicked the telegraph office's door open, or if he went around to the back, flipped the window, and entered the room. He constantly imagined all sorts of strange and terrifying scenes, which frightened himself quite a bit. At the same time, he decided to produce sun-holy water for the passengers who had eaten at Banzi Harbor last night, in order to avoid any remaining dormant danger. "What's wrong?" Ellen sensed Jam and Sparrow's abnormality. "I just remembered something." Klein used his clown's powers to keep his facial expression normal, but inside he was glad that he didn't take the risk last night and had now successfully left Banzi Harbor. As for the secrets of Rose Redemption and the King of Angels, he only had one thought in mind: quickly report it. If he didn't report it, was he allowing them to usher in 1351's new year? If he chose to hide the truth and wait until he had a sufficiently high sequence or enough strength to explore and reap the corresponding benefits, then Klein felt that he would feel very guilty and end up carrying a heavy burden if something happened during that time, causing the danger to be triggered prematurely, or if the remnant heretics would cause the death of one innocent passenger after another. That would only push him closer to losing control. Of course, reporting the matter needed to be done in a correct and astute manner. Klein wasn't foolish enough to tell Ellen directly or write an anonymous letter to the Church of Storms, which would then lead to a lot of trouble. First, the authorities would definitely investigate Jam and Sparrow's background, and things could be easily exposed if thorough investigations were made. Secondly, this identity might be exposed to the Rose Redemption, which might attract a King of Angels' pursuit. What Klein intended to do was to use the world to mention the anomaly in Banzi Harbor when the tarot gathering was held in 2 days. He would then have the fool to lightly allude to Rose Redemption and a King of Angels. As a member of the Church of Storms, the hanged man would naturally know what to do next. This would be a chance for him to perform a deed of merit. As for the blood of the direct descendants of the Medici family, Klein didn't even consider it, because neither he nor Miss Sharon had the intention of rescuing the evil spirit in the underground relic. Noticing that Jam and Sparrow obviously didn't want to mention his past, Ellen chuckled, took out a small black wooden box, and tossed it over. Klein reached out and caught it, using his eyes to express his puzzlement. "The bladder of the Murloc. It can be used to make items. It's very useful at sea. The bay-under ingredient of a Murloc, worth more than 150 pounds. The captain sure is generous." Klein had almost forgotten how Jam and Sparrow should react. Fortunately, he had a lot of experience in acting. He immediately sank his face and said, "I didn't save you for a reward." Ellen laughed and said, "I'm not giving you this in return for saving me. Aren't we friends now? Isn't it normal to help a friend make up for his shortcomings when he doesn't have such item?" What he said makes sense. There's no way to refute him at all. Klein held onto the small black box and remained silent for a few seconds. Finally, he nodded. Ellen covered his mouth as he yawned, before taking off his boat-shaped hat. "I need to return to my room to catch up on my sleep. See you at noon." Klein waved politely and led Danitz towards room 312. He saw that Donna and Denton were up early and waiting at the door. "Uncle Sparrow, what's that in your hand?" Donna asked curiously. Klein didn't say anything and directly opened the lid of the small black box. The interior was lined with a layer of black velvet, and sitting in the middle was a round, gem-like, transparent object. It had a blue, aqueous luster that swirled outwards. That day the Murlocs, Denton thought for a moment. "Bladder." At this moment, at Klein's signal, Danitz opened the door. Donna walked in briskly while stretching out her hand from behind her. She held a thick wad of cash that were a mix of 10-pound and 5-pound notes. My father, my mother, Uncle Cleves, and Uncle Timothy's family asked me to pass this to you. A total of 150 pounds. Donna smiled sweetly. They said that this isn't enough to express their gratitude, it's just to replenish the supplies you used. Those things are expensive, right? Still all right. Klein thought for a moment. Then he accepted the 150-pound gratuity so that Ertie and other ordinary people wouldn't feel uneasy. Seeing Uncle Jamin Sparrow put the cash and the small black wooden box into his pocket, Donna was relieved that she had finally completed the task her parents had handed her. She quickly got into character and found her true intention for visiting. She asked curiously and fearfully, "Uncle Sparrow, what kind of monsters were those last night? Are ghost stories true? Were you born with the ability to jump out of the flames and let light descend? Is this magic or witchcraft?" Stop, stop, stop. You have too many questions. Klein, who couldn't stand the heat any longer, took off the sun brooch and threw it on the desk in the living room. He casually replied at the same time. They're called Beyonder powers, those that are obtained through certain rituals and potions. A lot of ghost stories have archetypes, and last night's monsters were created by an evil ritual. Ask him about the rest. Klein glanced sideways at Danitz. How magical, Denton and Donna sighed. Then Donna said, her eyes shining, Uncle Sparrow, you're just like the Superman described by Emperor Roselle. Can we also become people like you through rituals and potions? Denton nodded heavily, echoing his sister's words, and both of them felt a surge of strong anticipation. At that moment, Donna noticed Jamin Sparrow's eyes turn melancholic. Soon after, she saw the mouth of this magical uncle open up, revealing a somewhat strange smile. Klein said in a low voice, this isn't something to be envied or anticipated. As long as you choose this path, you'll constantly be accompanied by threats and madness. You can beat them 100 times, 1,000 times, but as long as you lose once, you'll end up like that fallen bishop. As he spoke, he leaned on his cane, took off his suit, and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. One of his arms was shriveled and wrinkled, as though he were a centenarian. The other was translucent and colorless, with a direct view of the blood vessels, muscles, and aponeurosis beneath the skin. At the same time, his face grew dense pale flesh granules that made Donna and Denton fall backward in terror and slam into the door. With thin flesh granules growing on his face, Klein maintained his smile. See this? This is madness. No, Donna and Denton almost lost their minds, stumbled through the door and ran out. After a few steps, they fell to the ground, unable to keep their balance. How terrifying, Denton kept crying in a low voice. At that moment, they heard the door to room 312 clang shut. Donna gradually calmed down, not daring to think of Jamin Sparrow's appearance again. The way Uncle Sparrow looked, the flesh granules had occupied every inch of his face. The way his arms were shriveled, and translucent wasn't much better than the monsters of the night before. For some reason she recalled his eyes and the words, "This is madness." Her vision suddenly blurred, and she couldn't stop the tears from rolling down her cheeks. Donna, what's the matter with you?" Denton was so frightened by her reaction that he forgot his fear. Donna sobbed and said, "I don't know, JJ, just feel very, very sad all of a sudden." Inside room 312. Seeing that Klein had returned to normal, Danitz couldn't help but click his tongue. Actually, there's no need to scare the children like this. They'll have nightmares. Just tell them that taking potions is dangerous. Just as he finished his sentence, he saw a hard wooden cane covered in blood and dirt flying over, accompanied by a sentence that wasn't in the least bit emotional. "Wash it clean." Danitz reached out to grab the cane as the smile on his face froze. Backland Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey stood behind the white and gold railings on the second floor, watching the servants on the first floor come and go, bustling with activity. According to the customs of the Lone Kingdom, the nobles with fiefs would leave Backland 1 week after the New Year ball, and they would return to their own fiefs, where they would enjoy a pleasant life in the countryside or in a castle. In June, they would return to the capital, where they would socialize day after day. Of course, a banker with actual power and wealth like Earl Hall definitely needed to make trips between the two places to handle many matters. However, moving wasn't an easy task. Many things had to be tidied up beforehand, and some of the servants would bring them back to the manor or castle. Only after everything was ready would the masters begin their journey. After this tarot gathering ends, I should be sitting in a steam train back to Eastchester County. I hope that vampire gentleman really can get the fruit of the Tree of Elders and the blood of the Mirror Dragon so that I can become a psychiatrist before I leave Backland. Audrey allowed her thoughts to wander. Just then Lady Caitlin came over and asked with a smile, "Penny, for your thoughts." "Well, you're already an adult. When you get back to Backland in June, you'll be able to find something to do. Do you have any plans?" Audrey didn't think further and directly replied, "Mother, I want to join the church's charity organization. I want to get to know this world," she added silently in her heart. "Good idea," the Countess agreed. After giving her some advice, she walked down to the second floor and began to inspect the affairs of the family. Audrey withdrew her emotions and turned her head to the side. With a faint smile, she said to the large golden retriever that was sitting to her side, "Susie, are you looking forward to it? You can run as much as you want in the green pastures and in the lush woods." She was making fun of Susie because she had only become a gift because she wasn't a qualified foxhound. Susie instinctively wanted to stick her tongue out, but she stopped herself like a cultured lady. She answered without hiding her emotions, "Of course, I like to run, but I hate those barbaric fellows." "Are you referring to the foxhounds that father and the others rear?" Audrey pursed her lips to stop herself from smiling. She looked up at the wall clock and saw that it was almost time for the tarot gathering. Gods above the endless gray fog, the majestic palace stood still. Just as Emlyn White, who had arrived here once again, regained his vision, he saw Miss Justice opposite him looking at the end of the mottled long table before greeting cheerfully. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda." Audrey greeted everyone, one person at a time, starting with the Fool and ending with the world. This order wasn't according to the seating arrangement, but by the order of the tarot cards, the Fool was the beginning that contained all possibilities, and the world was the end that represented perfect sublimation. This was a little obsessive-compulsive disorder on Miss Audrey's part, a mysticism enthusiast. It started to appear with the increasing number of tarot club members. She really is a carefree girl of stately birth. Emlyn deliberately passed a deep judgment and politely responded to the greeting. During this process, he caught sight of the sun through the corner of his eye. He couldn't help but think of the recent days when he had been studying the detailed history of the Sanguine, the home of Baron Wayman. "There are a lot of details that I don't know about. There are indeed differences between professional researchers and amateur enthusiasts, but from this week onwards, Emlyn White, would be a professional researcher. Baron Waymandy has never mentioned anything related to the City of Silver, so I can't ask him directly. As the secret messiah of the Sanguine who is burdened with secrets, I have to be careful in such matters. Attending class for half a day and going to the cathedral for half a day before accompanying the dolls at night seems to be a pretty good life." Emlyn's thoughts gradually dispersed. Suddenly, he frowned and realized a very important question. "Why do I still go to the Harvest Church every day? Yes, as a noble Sanguine, I must put an end to the things I start. There have been a lot of patients recently. Having your reputation spread isn't a good thing." Emlyn's brow gradually relaxed into a softer frown. He saw that Miss Justice had completed her greeting. He raised his hand to knock on the table and looked at her. "The things you need." Audrey pressed her right hand down and made a gesture to stop him before saying with a faint smile, "We'll talk about this during the transaction period. This is Mr. Fool's reading time." Based on Mr. Vampire's tone, there must be at least one of the fruits of the Tree of Elders and the blood of a Mirror Dragon. "Audrey, you're going to be a psychiatrist soon. You're about to become a mid-sequence Beyonder." Audrey's mood became increasingly cheerful, the corners of her eyes filled with smile. She looked towards the figure amidst the thick fog and said with an uplifted tone towards the end, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I've gotten another 3 Roselle diary pages, Tilda, just short of 4 pages." She pursed her lips while in thought. With Miss Justice setting an example, Forbes also said, "Mr. Fool, I also have 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." He was also full of anticipation for this tarot gathering, because her second apprentice potion had been digested much faster than expected. The dormant dangers had already been completely eliminated the day before yesterday. Derek followed immediately. "Honorable Mr. Fool, I've copied some legends of ancient gods." Then he said to the hanged man, "I've also tabulated the list of monsters around the area." He really is a good child who doesn't need anyone to remind him. Klein, who had a rich harvest, sighed with emotion. "Seriously, he hasn't improved at all, even though this will lower the difficulty of me obtaining benefits." It also conceals the risk of me losing the resources from the City of Silver. Exposure is a problem that requires constant vigilance. Alger shook his head indiscernibly. Roselle's diary and the legend of the ancient gods soon appeared in the palm of Klein's hand. He skimmed through it quickly and found that 2 of the 6 pages in the diary were repetitions of the past. For example, one of Miss Justice's contributed pages matched a page which the hanged man had handed over last year. That's inevitable unless I can really teach them simplified Chinese. Klein sighed and willed the 2 diary pages to the back. The remaining 4 pages didn't contain very valuable information. Most of them belonged to the period when Roselle had lost his ideals and was obsessed with money, and the text was filled with sentences such as, "What did I invent today? What will I invent tomorrow? How many gold coins can it be sold for? Or how much investment I receive?" It nearly made Klein lose control of his expression, wishing to smack these diary pages in Roselle's face. At this moment, Audrey keenly discovered that the Dark Emperor card had returned to the side of Mr. Fool's hand and was placed face down. So it really was bestowed to his adorer. Was it to help him complete a mission? Or is there another possibility, that this is a new card of blasphemy and not the original one? Audrey guessed with interest. After flipping through the diary pages, Klein resisted the urge to take a deep breath to calm his heart, and he looked at the legends of the ancient god provided by Little Sun. It was quite a rough description. It divided the 8 ancient gods of the Second Epoch into 3 camps. The giant king Almir, the elf king Soniathrim, and the vampire ancestor Lilith were allies who fought against the dragon of imagination, Anquel, the phoenix ancestor, Gregrace, and the mutated king, Kvaster. As for the devil monarch, Farbody, and the annihilation demonic wolf, Phlegria, they were the ones who wanted to subvert all order and corrupt all living beings. In the records of the City of Silver, the 8 ancient gods were described as violent, evil, cruel, and terrifying. Even the ancestor vampire, Lilith, who superficially looked the most normal and was described as the embodiment of beauty, had a disgusting and ferocious side. For instance, she would manifest into a mountain range of flesh. On top of it grew all kinds of reproductive organs, as they spewed out thick black fog, while constantly producing all sorts of strange creatures. All powerhouses who approached her would be overwhelmed by the desire to mate and reproduce, becoming a walking organ. And all living beings who saw this scene, other than the other ancient gods, would lose their minds without exception or mutate on the spot, while others became crazy. The records of the City of Silver originated from the ancient texts of the Giant King's court. Of course, that was what they claimed. I cannot eliminate the possibility that this is to discredit an ally. This aspect is rather similar to the loss of control of the primordial moon, who the sanguine pray to. Is this one of the traits when one follows the moon pathway to the end? At this thought, Klein almost raised his head to sweep his glance at Emlyn White. In the legends of the City of Silver, the vampire ancestor, Lilith, really did control the crimson moon. As long as she wanted, she could make the blood moon appear every day for 365 days a year, allowing the negative energy to rampage through the lands and the spirit world to interact with reality for an extended period of time, releasing countless unspeakable monsters and evil spirits. This is the power of a deity. I wonder what the difference is between the ancient gods and the current true gods. Why do all of them look like evil gods in the legends of the sanguine? Lilith isn't like that. One of them is lying between the 2 of them. Or could it be that there was a change midway, from the one recorded in the City of Silver to the one depicted in the legends of the sanguine? Klein looked away and took note of the details. He made the paper in his hands vanish and leaned back slightly. "You may begin." With her bright eyes, Audrey looked at Emlyn White and immediately said, "Mr. Moon, do you have news of the fruit of the Tree of Elders and the blood of a mirror dragon?" Emlyn nodded his chin and said, "A total of 750 pounds. Just pay this amount and they'll be yours. And of course there's my payment. 100 pounds. Audrey didn't bother with the total price at all and happily responded, "Deal." He hoped that the deal will be completed today or tomorrow. "No problem." Emlyn, who was about to make 100 pounds, couldn't refuse Miss Justice's request. "Awesome." Audrey lowered her right hand, clenched it into a fist, and lightly pumped it twice. At that moment Alger turned his head to look at Mr. Vampire. "Do you still want the inheritance of that sanguine baron?" 4,500 pounds. That's the best price I managed to get for you. In fact, the pirate was willing to give it up for 3,200 pounds. Lynn's expression twisted. If it's only 1,000 pounds, then I'll definitely take it, but he replied inwardly. Although their family members were pretty good apothecaries and doctors, with a modest annual income and long lives that allowed them to save a fortune, Lynn had been unable to save any money since he became infatuated with dolls. From time to time, he would order some custom dolls. Even if the 100 pounds which he hadn't received yet was counted, his personal savings didn't even reach 500 pounds, of which 150 pounds had been contributed by Detective Sherlock Moriarty. "I'll think about it again," Lynn said with difficulty, suddenly feeling that he had to find some way to quickly save up money. This fellow Lynn just made the sound of poverty. Upon seeing this scene, Klein happily quipped inwardly. Being friends with Mr. Vampire in reality, Klein had heard him mention that over the years, he had spent more than 7,000 pounds on dolls, which made Klein marvel at the price of puppets and how extravagant Lynn was. "No problem." The hanged man didn't press further. He turned to Audrey. "My fair lady, the artisan has completed the work and has obtained a rather mystical item. TT allows you to truly change your appearance while also providing you with 3 Beyonder powers: flame controlling, damage transfer, and danger intuition. It improves your balance and agility. It's a silver mask, but it can also be a hat or an earring. It can change its appearance, and you can name it. Of course, it also has its own minor flaw. When you wear it, your emotions will be amplified, and you must learn how to control yourself. TT costs 5,500 pounds. At this point, the hanged man chuckled and said to the world, "The Beyonder characteristic you provided earns you 4,500 pounds, and the artisan's workmanship is worth 1,000 pounds. 4,500 pounds, much better than I had expected, even though there's a 15% commission, that is to say, 675 pounds for Mr. Hanged Man." Klein immediately controlled the world and nodded in agreement. That wouldn't be an issue. Emotions would be amplified. According to Miss Escalante, I'll have the ability to influence the moods and mental states of other people when I advance to psychiatrist. I should be able to do the same for myself. Yes, that flaw isn't a problem. Audrey nodded lightly. T will pay within 2 days of receiving the mystical item. In order to not reveal the secret of the Tarot Club, she had to wait until she had received the item before she could claim reimbursement from her father. Sure, Hanged Man wasn't the least bit worried about Miss Justice's credibility. So Rich, both Lynn and Force felt agitated at the same time. Phew, Klein breathed a quiet sigh of relief. This meant that more than 3,000 pounds of his would be available soon. Thank you, Miss Justice. He silently drew a crimson moon inwardly. Everyone frankly speaking, although Alger had predicted that Miss Justice wouldn't bargain, and the fact that the mystical item was indeed worth about 5,500 pounds, he still felt a strong sense of discomfort over such action. It felt like after all the hard work he had put in to make a killing, the money he earned wasn't even more than her pocket money. 675 pounds split from the world, and the artisan's fee is only 600 pounds. He'll earn a net profit of 400 pounds. I've made a total of 1,075 pounds in this transaction, but the world isn't a simple figure. He has a great deal of Beyonder characteristics and potion formulas, and he's involved in a great number of events. He's in the know of relatively important information. It's not worth it to get into a conflict with him over a few hundred pounds. Otherwise, I could have pushed the price of his Beyonder characteristic to below 4,000 pounds, the hanged man thought wistfully. As the fool rejoiced at the prospect of receiving 3,825 pounds, Derek looked at the lady across him and earnestly said, "Miss Magician, your spirit eater's stomach pouch is ready." "Excellent." Force heaved a sigh of relief. "I'll pay 300 pounds in cash to Mr. Hanged Man." Upon hearing this, Alger's spirit was also lifted. He hurriedly requested the fool sitting at the end of the long bronze table for permission to conjure the potion formula. A few seconds later, he wrote the Solar High Priest formula onto the yellowish-brown goatskin parchment in front of him. Sequence 7. Solar High Priest. Main ingredients: 1 comb of a dawn rooster, 1 fruit of a radiant spirit pack tree. Supplementary ingredients: 100 ml of a dawn rooster, 10 drops of sun essential oil, 8 grams of fingered citron powder, and 5 grams of solidified lava. Although Klein didn't deliberately pry into this potion formula, the content which was conjured thanks to him was still reflected in his mind. As long as he was willing to use dream divination to recall, he would immediately get the corresponding knowledge. He couldn't help but exclaim, indeed, being a platform is most profitable. Derek received the piece of parchment expectantly, glancing at it with relief and excitement. Then he conjured the list of monsters which were found in the area surrounding the City of Silver, letting the Hanged Man pick out the Beyonder ingredients that would be used to level the difference in prices. Alger calmly and carefully checked the list, gaining a precise understanding of the situation around the City of Silver. After that, he selected 3 ingredients that he knew had buyers and prices. After that, I'll be able to sell them within 2 days, earning me about £1,000. Counting the £300 from Miss Magician and the previous £1,075, I'll finally have enough money for the dragon-eyed sea condor's eyeballs. Feeling exhausted, Alger turned his head to the side and said to Fours, "Miss Magician, you can prepare the transaction for the dragon-eyed sea condor eyeball." The Hanged Man had less than £20 on him at present, and even the artisan fees he had paid in advance was borrowed thanks to his wide network of contacts. However, by the end of the transaction, his cash assets would reach £2,375, sufficient enough to cover the £2,000 required for the main ingredient. Forrest thought of the loss she had suffered last week at the hands of Mr. Hanged Man and responded, feeling slight grievance, all right. For her, how much this deal would eventually earn her would depend on her teacher, Dorian Gray. She wouldn't earn anything extra beyond what he was willing to share with her. At the end of the transaction segment, Klein manipulated the world to seek to purchase the remnant spirituality of ancient wraiths and a pair of eyes from a 6-winged gargoyle. As for the sale or process of making the Murloc bladder into a mystical item, he temporarily didn't intend to do it through the Tarot Club. He wished to use it as a catalyst to expand his social connections and resource channels at sea. After today's tarot gathering, Miss Justice will finish gathering her psychiatrist potion's ingredients, and the same is true for Miss Magician's Trickmaster potion. Now that little son has the formula, he can finally work towards Sequence 7. He's one step closer to providing me with a way to remove the mental corruption inside a Beyonder characteristic. Mr. Hanged Man is about to receive one of the main ingredients of Wind Blessed, so there's only one last obstacle in his way before reaching Sequence 6. Only Emlyn hasn't yet made up his mind or found a solution. There's no hope of him advancing in the near future. Klein looked around and said with a chuckle, "Continue your free exchange." Audrey was about to say something out of habit, but when she thought about it carefully, she felt that there was no news to share this week. Apart from the numerous balls I've attended and the 2 psychology classes, there are only matters regarding my return to Eastchester County that can be talked about, but there's no need to. She pursed her lips and remained silent. Fours, who was still in her languid state from the New Year's holidays, continued having a blank mind. She commented, feeling rather guiltily, "Backland is still under the same kind of high pressure as before. Don't take any risks unless you're an official Beyonder." "Is that so?" Emlyn, who had been behaving well during this time, frowned doubtfully. A vampire like him, who led a routine lifestyle, couldn't experience the pain of having all the Beyonder gatherings stop. The Hanged Man nodded and thought for a while. Then he said to the son, "Don't be careless. Before holding a sacrificial ritual, it's best if you confirm that the chief who led the exploratory team isn't in the City of Silver, or if he's busy with other matters." "Mr. Hanged Man, do you mean that the chief could have noticed the repeated cycle of fate?" Derek asked in astonishment. The Hanged Man replied solemnly, "That possibility can't be ruled out. However, I can't be sure since I don't know enough about your City of Silver." Having said that, he hid a smile and presented a serious expression. Derek said with chagrin, "There are many things I'm not sure of either." Alger sighed inwardly, eliminating his disappointed emotion. "In short, caution and carefulness will allow you to live longer." "Thank you for your reminder," the son said sincerely. The Hanged Man withdrew his gaze and said with a smile, "Recently, the sea has been relatively calm." "No, that's just what you think," Klein silently retorted, manipulating the world to speak with a hoarse voice. "I just happened to hear about something at sea." Without waiting for the Hanged Man to ask, he looked at Justice and the Magician. "Ladies, can you buy me a radio transceiver? JT can give it a try." Fours agreed without paying too much attention. As she was about to leave Backland, Audrey could only say sorry. After negotiating this deal, the world cleared his throat and said, "That matter has something to do with the Church of Storm." "Something to do with the church? Why didn't I receive any notice?" Is it not required for them to pass it down to people at my level? The hanged man frowned and waited patiently for the world to speak in detail. The world originally wanted to sweep the hanged man with a teasing look, but due to the difficulty of those sequence of actions, he could only regretfully give up. With a heavy and hoarse laugh, he said, an old custom in Banzi Harbor was revived. Some of the inhabitants became heretics, and even a bishop of the Church of Storms was corrupt. He heard that the matter has been resolved, but quite a few people died. Banzi Harbor, Alger recalled the situation of the area and explained to Miss Justice and the others who remained confused. There's a custom of living sacrifices there, and the target is an evil spirit called the God of Weather. Overseas in the southern continent, there are quite a number of such evil spirits. On the surface, it seems like they've been cleared away, but in reality, they continue living in a strange state. Many people have suddenly died in those places. It isn't necessarily because of an illness. If you guys have similar travel or adventure plans, don't be careless. Alger tried to describe what had happened in Banzi Harbor as an accident, one that was within the realm of understanding. Suddenly, he heard rather deep laughter. This laughter came from the end of the mottled long table. Mr. Fool, the hanged man suddenly turned his head. Mr. Fool, Banzi Harbor isn't as simple as it seems. Audrey immediately looked at Mr. Fool, who was sitting upright on his high-back chair. Noticing looks of puzzlement, curiosity, or excitement, Klein laughed leisurely with a hint of reminiscence in his voice. This reminds me of a king of angels. A king of angels. The matter of Banzi Harbor involves a king of angels. Audrey's eyes widened in anticipation of what Mr. Fool was to say next. A king of angels. Forrest took a deep breath, her expression somewhat bitter. Why is it that all we talk about at the Tarot Club is the descent of the true creator, the awakening of the primordial demoness, and the reappearance of a king of angels? I'm only a sequence 9. She wanted to look up at the sky and sigh. Lin, on the other hand, felt a baffling sense of excitement, having found another reason for why his ancestor had gotten him to pray to the fool. As expected, this is a gathering of messiahs in preparation for the apocalypse. We are the chosen ones who will gradually face evil existences such as the king of angels, the primordial demoness, the true creator, and so on. Lin had an impulse to immediately agree to the deal proposed by the hanged man, but the fact that he had no money had ruthlessly crushed the fantasy in his mind. Which king of angels will it be? On a rare occasion, Derek joined in with the conversation with Miss Justice and the rest. A king of angels, what secret is Banzi Harbor hiding? Alger was waiting for the answer with rapt attention. Seeing that Mr. Fool didn't plan on continuing, Audrey couldn't help but ask, Honorable Mr. Fool, which king of angels is it? Klein leaned back in his chair, chuckled, and said, Medici, who established the Rose Redemption. His descendants live in Banzi. Rose Redemption. The king of angels related to the true creator. Audrey didn't expect that the matter would be multi-layered, with each layer more serious than the last. She subconsciously asked Banzi. That's the old name of Banzi, Alger replied in a low voice as he clenched his hand. He could no longer imagine the truth behind this matter. He only knew that the unforeseen event in Banzi Harbor might not be over yet. The danger that could devour people remained lurking in the shadow. He didn't know much about the phrase Rose Redemption, only knowing that it had something to do with the temple of the true creator and the angel of fate, Ouroboros, but was unable to confirm exactly what it represented. In short, the level of this matter is beyond my imagination. Alger looked at the end of the long, mottled table, and suddenly the thought flashed through his mind that Mr. Fool really did know the 8 kings of angels and that he knew many secrets. At that moment, he thought of something. Just last week at the gathering, Miss Justice had inquired about the other kings of angels, and Mr. Fool's answer was that we will come into contact with them in the future. And just a week later, we really have come into contact with a new king of angels. Mr. Fool had foreseen this. Alger's pupils shrank as he lowered his gaze in fear. Guess amidst his shock, another doubt surfaced in Alger's mind. If Mr. Fool had foreseen this, why did he mention that Banzi Harbor's matter is related to Rose Redemption and the king of angels, Medici? Did he tell us on purpose? He hopes to spread this matter through us. The target is the king of angels, Medici. No, it's more likely to be the true creator. Mr. Fool has repeatedly thwarted the plans of the true creator before, so it should be no exception this time. The term Rose Redemption appeared in the abandoned temple of the true Creator, and it's established by the King of Angels, Medici, and Arabaro. Clearly, they share a deep connection with the true Creator. Banzi Harbor only has our Church of Storms, so the person Mr. Fool is really informing is actually me. Alger vaguely understood something. Then he became acutely aware of another problem. The last time the world mentioned that something major was about to happen in Backland, it was immediately confirmed by Mr. Fool, and it later involved the awakening of the primordial demoness and the descent of the true Creator. This time, the abnormality at Banzi Harbor also received a response from Mr. Fool. He revealed the secret hidden in ancient Binzi, and has brought the Rose Redemption and the King of Angels to the forefront of all the members of the Tarot Club. Isn't this T2 coincidental? Yes, news provided by the world previously had to do with Backland, and this is the first time it involves the sea. Furthermore, Mr. Fool had mentioned last week that his adorer has been forced to leave Backland because of the Great Smog. They match perfectly. So the world is actually Mr. Fool's adorer. No, he should be a representative among all his adorers in the Tarot Club. He's to do things that Mr. Fool finds inconvenient. Of course, through this gathering, the adorer will also trade goods and knowledge in order to advance himself. This is also considered a form of Mr. Fool's nurturing of him. On careful thought, this theory is probably correct. At least, the world has never collected Roselle's diary in exchange for knowledge or intelligence from Mr. Fool. As his adorer, it's his duty, so he has probably submitted them in private. From this conclusion, some deliberate questions or contradictions on the world's part are meant to conceal his identity as an adorer. This is consistent with his experienced, skilled, and cunning character. In addition to the hidden attempt to awaken as he slowly lifts the seal, Mr. Fool holds the tarot gathering to also use us to interfere in certain events. This is evident from the composition of the members: a high noble, a Beyonder at the bishop level of the church, a survivor of the forsaken land of the gods, a student of the Abraham family, an adult vampire. Each of us represents a faction, or a particular circle or resource channel. Many thoughts flashed through Alger's mind. Not only was he not repressed by his own guesses, but he was also excited. To him, Mr. Fool's unknown purpose was the most frightening thing. Having an initial understanding of what he wanted to do allowed him to effectively avoid any risks and improve himself by doing so. As long as the Fool wants to use us to do things, he'll definitely give us some benefit. This is exactly what I was hoping for. Otherwise, I don't know when I'll be able to see the hope of becoming a demigod. Heh, the world, you definitely didn't expect that I would see through your disguise. Alger's fear subsided, and he began to think about how to use the information about Banzi Harbor. He couldn't report the matter just like that, as it would arouse suspicion, and he had to patiently wait for an opportunity to let the higher-ups appreciate him and reward him without ending up being monitored. Audrey could tell that Mr. Hanged Man was undergoing a mental exercise, but she didn't expect him to come up with so many guesses in such a short period of time. And from the words of Mr. Fool, she was delighted to learn that Rose Redemption was a secret organization established by a number of kings of angels, which was also related to the true Creator. At the same time, she vaguely sensed the strangeness of the world. She realized that this member of the organization, who was the most difficult to read, was always involved in important matters and could always obtain important information. Furthermore, he constantly produced formulas, ingredients, and Beyonder characteristics, as if he could successfully hunt down a Beyonder within 1 to 2 weeks. He left Backland and went to sea. Or was it a rumor he heard in Backland? Should I tell this information to the church? Well, Mr. Hanged Man has a close relationship with the Church of Storms, so it's better for him to do it, and there wouldn't be any problems. Audrey suppressed the thought of probing and only curiously asked, "Honorable Mr. Fool, what's the title of the King of Angels, Medici? Or should I say, what is his pathway?" Klein leaned back into his chair and said with a deep chuckle, "Red Priest." Red Priest? Which pathway is that? It sounds very similar to the Dark Emperor. Could it be that it's another Sequence 0 title? Audrey thought with excitement and joy. Red Priest, Derek silently muttered the words, realizing that there was no corresponding record in the City of Silver's history. Perhaps I haven't read enough, having only received a general education, he thought regretfully. Fours and Lin listened as if they were listening to a story and were equally interested in similar information. The only problem is that I can't brag about it or write it into my novels. Fours felt a pang of regret. Mr. Hanged Man will likely report it to his superiors. Let's hope he doesn't delay it for too long. With his shrewdness, he may have already figured out some of the problems regarding the world and has grasped the relationship between him and the fool. Fortunately, I've deliberately set up the world to be Sherlock Moriarty since a long time ago, giving him the identity of an adorer. Mr. Hanged Man can at best detect it up to this point, unable to imagine that the world is actually a dummy. Klein raised his hand to his chin, smiled, and said, "Continue." Seeing that Mr. Fool was no longer talking about the subject, Emlyn, who had freed himself from his emotions as a messiah, began to face the difficult problems of reality. That was his lack of money. Regardless, he had never considered selling off his doll. He only told himself that he needed to be frugal in the future. Only after half a year or even a year could he get himself a new doll, or he could buy a new set of clothes for the dolls he already had. In addition, the only way he could think of making money was to sell some potions that had a miraculous effect, but that could easily bring hidden danger to his clansmen in battle. This is an arrangement by the ancestor. Logically speaking, Lord Nibs should provide me help, but Mr. Fool wishes for me to keep it a secret, to be the messiah in the shadows who's burdened with responsibility. I'm not to reveal it on my own accord. After thinking for a few seconds, Emlyn pumped himself up, cleared his throat, and said, "Everyone, I have a question. Here's the matter. Suppose there's a powerhouse who has arranged for you to investigate something. Although you have successfully obtained the information, you are unable to report it to the person due to certain reasons. Then, how can you continue to get support from this powerhouse?" Having said this, Emlyn suddenly felt that this act was somewhat shameful. This makes me appear like a traitor and a spy. No, I'm doing this for the sake of the Sanguine's continuation. For this, I have to give up my reputation and bear the burden of being misunderstood. When this is over, and when the truth is revealed, they'll be moved by me. Emlyn quickly eased his prior feelings. At this moment, Audrey, Fours, and Derek cast their eyes towards Alger. In their eyes, Mr. Hanged Man was the most experienced and the best teacher in this field. Klein also thought so too. Alger glanced at the moon and chuckled. "TT's simple, but you have to take some risks." Emlyn subconsciously denied, "It's not me." The Hanged Man replied with a chuckle, "Let's assume that it's you." He continued his description. "You will slowly display a certain level of abnormalities in your daily life, allowing that powerhouse to see that you have a problem. He will have two choices. One is to interrogate you directly, but it will be very easy to end up losing a lead for clues. The second is to inadvertently provide you with help so that you can investigate more thoroughly and then send people to monitor you. T think the second possibility is the most likely. The risk you have to take is how to not reveal the information you want to hide while under surveillance. That works. In fact, I won't be exposed either. Every tarot gathering, I'll be resting in the Harvest Church, looking normal on the outside. As for the sacrifice of items and the receiving of bestowments, they're things that can be shown to Lord Nibs and the other. It will allow them to guess that I have formed some sort of connection with Mr. Fool, but they can't imagine that I've already joined a secret gathering. Very well. While I'm studying history, I'll take the initiative to ask Baron Waymondy about the City of Silver." Lynn's eyes lit up as he had an idea. He then thought of something and turned to the Hanged Man. "Last week, didn't you ask about a way to make everyone on board a ship sleep at the same time? It's very simple. I can provide you with a magical anesthetic gas that can effectively spread without any irritating smell. Even on the deck, one will fall unconscious once they catch a whiff of it. Of course, it's best if you choose a windless night and that the targets are unable to sense danger, and their physiques cannot be too strong. Those Beyonders that are well known for their physiques in Sequence 9 are the limit. TT can cause deep slumber that lasts for more than 3 hours. The effects will constantly decline after that. £100 a can, and an extra £30 for me." The Hanged Man thought about the situation of the sailors on the ghost ship and didn't haggle. Okay. He wanted to erect a certain image in front of the moon to prepare for the big transaction that would follow. He had thought of using a slumber charm, but that would require him to chant the incantation. It would make the sailors notice that something was wrong and suspect something afterward. At the end of the exchange, Klein tapped the surface of the long, mottled table with his finger, and he said with a leisurely smile, "I can foresee that everyone will present a new appearance of themselves next week." Let us end today's gathering here. Thank you for your blessings. Audrey was the first to stand up. She took her leave, expressing her gratitude. With Mr. Fool saying those words, she felt more confident in consuming the psychiatrist's potion. As the magician and the others repeated the same words, one figure after another disappeared from the palace. The area above the gray fog returned to its eternal silence. Backland's Sherwood Burrow. As the crimson glow faded from her eyes, foresaw the familiar desk and open notebook which she used to jot down her inspiration. This experience was no longer anything new, but it still evoked reverence from the bottom of her heart. This was a power that didn't belong to humans, something that even demigods were incapable of. I'll receive the stomach pouch of a spirit eater in 2 days. My apprentice potion has already been digested. Finally, I'll become a trickmaster. I wonder what beyonder powers I'll receive. By advancing by my own abilities, teacher will definitely place greater importance on me. Apart from potion formulas in the future, perhaps I might be provided with some beyonder ingredients. How I look forward to that very much. I don't even know the corresponding names of sequence 6 and 5. I only know that sequence 7 is astrologer. After I become a trickmaster, I'll immediately write to teacher, for it felt like she was one step closer to ridding herself from the curse of the full moon. At this moment, she heard the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. Finally, it turned into the slam of the door. Zio is out again. She's so busy. For sighed silently. If not for the £400 debt that she owes Viscount Glaint, we would probably be vacationing at Daisy Bay now. After a long period of hard work, and thanks to the enhancement of her strength, certain tasks that were previously impossible for her to complete have become simple. Moreover, from time to time, Zio would receive small tasks that pay well from the Golden Masked Man. Zio has already raised her savings from £110 to £320, leaving her with only £80 left to pay off her debt. In fact, I could spot her £80, but unfortunately, although she isn't tall, she still has a lot of pride in her, for as withdrew her thoughts and thought about the matter Mr. World had entrusted her. As a doctor and a writer, she didn't know much about radios or anything about the entire field of machinery. She didn't usually pay attention to such information when reading the newspapers, so she didn't know where she could buy the kind of transceiver the world wanted. A department store. It probably doesn't sell one, all right. Avil writes science fiction, so he should know a lot about such matter. Forrest quickly found the right person to consult. However, she immediately had a new problem. Was she to visit him directly, or was she to write him a letter of inquiry? Glancing at the chair covered in a thick, soft blanket, and smelling the fragrance of coffee and tobacco emanating the room, she felt a warmth slowly creeping through her body. Bit by bit, her motivation to leave the house crumbled. I'm not familiar with him, so I shouldn't rashly pay him a visit. She sat down with a grunt and unfolded a piece of paper. In the Berg household in the city of Silver. Derek opened his eyes and woke up from feigning sleep. According to his original plan, he would have immediately held a sacrificial ritual to send out the stomach pouch of the spirit eater. However, the words of the hanged man reminded him to be more cautious and make more observation. I'll gather the ingredients, mister. Hanged man require first, and then I'll do the sacrificial ritual all at once. Derek remained silent for a few seconds. Then he attached his axe of hurricane to his body and headed for the steeple. He first checked the items available for exchanging using merit points, but he wasn't in a hurry to complete the transaction. He planned to go to the underground market to take a look once the lightning in the sky subsided. Derek went up to the 3rd floor and headed straight for the library section that dealt with mythology and ancient classics, hungering for valuable information he hadn't learned yet. Suddenly he saw a hard and yellowed book with a cover, Giant King's Court, Book of Blackrock hand-copied edition. It's a record passed down from the Giant King's Court. I wonder if there's anything related to the Kings of Angels. Derek reached for the book, pulled it out, and saw that it was bound in a brown monster hide. At that moment, on the upper level of the library, Colin Iliad was wearing a flaxen-colored linen shirt and a brown coat and standing there quietly, looking down. His unkempt, grizzled hair flailed in the breeze from the window, and his pale blue eyes were deep and reserved. Wednesday, 12 January. 5:40 p.m. The sky was dark and cloudy, with deep blue waves undulating across the sea. The white agate bobbed up and down in this storm, like a toy in the palm of a giant. This is the sea. No matter how powerful one is, one will appear insignificant in front of it. Danet stood by the window and enjoyed the scenery outside. Fortunately, we're almost at the city of generosity. From the moment they left Banzi Harbor, the White Agate's journey had been smooth sailing. With the help of the wind, it reached a stable speed of 15 knots. Hence, even though they arrived at Tiana port a little later than scheduled, they completed the entire journey half a day early. That is to say, the White Agate, which was scheduled to arrive at the city of generosity on the morning of the 13th, arrived on the evening of the 12th. Hearing Danit's reflections, Klein just glanced up at him, then looked away and continued his contemplation. The more he played the part of Jam and Sparrow, and the more he had to force himself to behave in accordance with his persona, the more deeply he realized what kind of person he was. When faced with different situations, he realized that the choices he really wanted to make were different from Jam and Sparrow. For example, he would have responded to Danitz by idly chatting with him about the weather at sea and the disasters caused by those terrible storms, but Jam and Sparrow wouldn't. He had to be cold and reserved. The more there are such differences, the more I recognize myself. Klein sighed inwardly. This was something he hadn't experienced when he moved about with his identity as the private detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Back then, he didn't have to disguise his personality and had just been himself. I feel like I've digested my potion a little, however. Jam and Sparrow has traits that are similar to myself. At the very least, when choosing to disembark and entering Banzi Harbor to save the others, I overlapped with this identity of mine. And there was no difference, of course. It could also be said that I was adding a certain kind of persona into the mix. Beneath Jam and Sparrow's gentleness and madness, he has a kind, brave, and compassionate heart that values relationships. Heh, I can't boast about myself. If I had known earlier that Banzi was Binzi, I would have most likely been terrified, not necessarily. At the very least, the danger which was divine was within an acceptable range, Klein thought, summing things up as he engaged in self-deprecation. This made him more aware of a problem. Although playing the role of a purely fictional person could help him digest the potion, he needed to replace an existing identity to speed up and improve his progress. He needed to gain the affirmation of people from the other person's interpersonal relationships, feel the corresponding emotions of joy, anger, sadness, and immersing himself in them, but not getting obsessed. Become anyone, but ultimately become yourself in the end. And get feedback from the people involved. Klein looked at the pale yellow carpet, his mind racing. Seeing Jam and Sparrow without a response, Danitz spread his hands helplessly, feeling bored out of his mind. This crazy guy is good in every way other than making me do what servants do. There's only one thing: he doesn't like to talk. There's a communication barrier with him. If this goes on, I'll definitely go crazy. Fortunately, I'm finally at Bayam. I can finally be free. Danitz felt that he would sooner or later develop a habit of talking to himself when faced with a similar silence. After a while, he saw Jam and Sparrow look up, smile, and say, "You can tell me about the pirate point of contacts in Bayam." "Dogshit. It's better if you don't say anything." Danitz's expression twisted. Whoosh. At 6:15 p.m., just before the storm arrived, the White Agate docked smoothly and arrived at the capital of the Rorsted Archipelago, Bayam, the city of generosity. It was also known as the Spice Archipelago, and it was home to a variety of exotic spices, with the plantations of these produce being mainstays of the economy. The Blue Mountain Island, where Bayam was located, occupied more than half of the archipelago, which was mostly covered in forest. It had gold, silver, copper, coal, iron, and other minerals, as well as a plentiful variety of fruits due to the particularly fertile land. For these reasons, the first batch of colonists named the seaside city they built the City of Generosity. They believed it was a land of treasure promised by the gods, where it flowed with milk and honey. Klein picked up his suitcase, which Danitz packed, and he left room 312, entering the corridor that led to the deck. Without any surprises, he met Donna's family, Cleves, and others. The two siblings were still a little afraid of Klein after the fright he gave them. They hid behind their parents and bodyguards and didn't dare to speak, appearing like deflated balloons. Klein nodded slightly as a form of greeting. At this moment, Ertie Branch hesitated for a second and then took a half-step forward. "Mr. Sparrow, will you be staying in Bayam?" "TF, I wish to hire no request for your help. How can I contact you?" He's indeed a businessman with a spirit of adventure. Even if he's afraid, he still wishes to befriend someone with Bayonder powers, Klein thought for a moment. What newspapers are in circulation over here? The Sonya Morning Post and the News Report are popular in the archipelago, Erdi said without any thought. Put an advertisement in the Sonya Morning Post for 3 days in a row asking to buy Damir's special cured meat, and leave an address. PLL go look for you, and if I don't show up 3 days later, it means I'm at sea again. Klein was careful to give a one-way method of contact. All right. Erdi exhaled and smiled. Cleves and the others expressed their gratitude once again, and left the cabin in an orderly manner. Noticing the gangway in sight, Donna suddenly slowed her pace and stepped back next to Klein, raised her face, and bit her lip. Uncle Sparrow S., since that kind of power definitely brings about threats and madness, why did you choose to have it? He had thought about this question for a long time before finally mustering the courage to ask. Klein was startled, and he instinctively formed a smile. For my dream. Then he lowered his voice and said 2 words, and protect. Protect. Donna mumbled the word in a slightly lost voice, picked up her pace, and caught up with her parents. After watching the Branch family leave the White Agate, Klein retracted his gaze and said to Danitz, "You're free." For a moment, Danitz wasn't used to it.